You sit before me tonight, and I can almost feel the weight pressing against your chest. The unseen burden that comes from knowing too much, from sensing too deeply, from carrying a truth that is not entirely yours, yet refuses to leave you. This is the secret suffering of the empath, the hidden nightmare woven into the gift of sensitivity. It is a paradox. What seems like grace becomes a curse. What feels like connection becomes a prison. And the very light that illuminates others' pain plunges you into darkness. I want you to hear me clearly. This curse is not madness, nor is it weakness. It is a consequence of touching the archetypal currents that run beneath the surface of life, the collective unconscious spilling its tides into your fragile vessel. When you know too much, you cannot unknow it. When you sense what lies beneath another's words, when you glimpse the shadow coiled around their heart, when you intuit the wound they themselves cannot name you, become bound. To see truth is to be marked by it. And the curse is not merely the knowing, but the loneliness that follows, for knowledge that is too deep cannot always be shared. The words fall flat, the world grows suspicious, and you are left isolated in your perception. You wander through human interactions like a dreamer among sleepers, awake while others slumber, cursed to hold an awareness that feels like fire in your veins. Empathy at its surface appears noble. We speak of compassion, of kindness, of the ability to feel another's joy and sorrow. But true empathy, the kind that seizes the soul and drags it into the labyrinths of another's unconscious, is no gentle virtue. It is an initiation into mystery, and mystery always exacts a price. For to feel what is not yours is to blur the boundary of the self. You become porous, transparent, and into you pour the sorrows of others, the projections of strangers, the cries of archetypes that use human mouths as instruments. You become a vessel, but not always a holy one. Sometimes you are only the container of poison, of grief, of rage that belongs to another yet festers within you. This is why empaths so often live on the edge of exhaustion. The psyche, unlike the body, has no skin to protect it. It has only the shadow, the unconscious defense that swallows what you cannot face. And yet, for the empath, the shadow is not enough. It is overwhelmed. It cannot shield you from what is absorbed. The unconscious of the other leaks into you, and soon you do not know where you end and they begin. You are not merely feeling for them, you are feeling as them, becoming the double, the psychic twin, condemned to suffer in their place. And here is the terrible irony: they remain oblivious to your sacrifice. The one who bleeds for them is invisible, while they continue to wander, unaware that someone else has taken up their cross. Now let us consider why this occurs. For nothing in the psyche is random. Archetypes govern even the empath's wound. The figure of the wounded healer comes to mind. That ancient pattern embodied by Chiron, the centaur who was both wise and maimed. His wound could not be healed, yet from it flowed wisdom for others. This is the paradox of the empath. Their wound opens them to the pain of others, yet it never fully closes. They walk the earth with an unhealed scar that becomes the doorway through which other wounds enter. Do you see how dangerous this is? The very opening that makes you compassionate also leaves you defenseless. It is as if your soul is stitched with threads of glass, fragile, cutting, transparent, forever vulnerable to what passes through. And when you carry too much of the other, something sinister begins, the nightmare. At first, it seems like mere fatigue, a heaviness of spirit, an inexplainable sadness. But then, in the night, the borrowed shadows rise. You dream of faces that are not yours, voices that whisper confessions you never lived, images of violence or betrayal that belong to another's history. The dream world, which is the language of the unconscious, becomes crowded with foreign spirits. Your soul, once a sanctuary, is now a haunted house, and each night the tenants multiply. This is the empath's nightmare, not only the weight of the day, but the invasion of the night where boundaries collapse and you live in the dreams of others. Have you ever awakened with the taste of grief in your mouth, and yet you know it is not your grief? Have you carried anger in your chest and searched in vain for its source, realizing only later it was the echo of another's rage? This is the nightmare of knowing too much. For to know is to participate, and participation in the unconscious of another is not safe. It binds you into their fate. You carry their archetype as if it were your own, and slowly you become entangled in destinies that were never meant to be yours. The empath becomes a vessel of possession, not by demons in the medieval sense, but by archetypal energies too great for one soul to bear. The shadow is not polite. It does not ask permission to enter. It uses projection as its key, and those around you, friends, lovers, even strangers, cast their unacknowledged contents into you because they sense unconsciously that you are open. You are the one who will carry what they refuse to hold. They do not know they are doing it. You may not even know it at first, but slowly the burden accumulates. You become heavy, sick, filled with psychic toxins. You may call it depression, anxiety, burnout, but these are only the names we give to an archetypal possession. You are living the nightmare of the empath, the curse of knowing too much, because you cannot close the door once it is opened. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to awaken you. The gift of empathy, if unconscious, becomes a curse, but if brought into awareness, if disciplined and integrated, it can become power. Yet, intégration demande sacrifice. You must face the nightmare directly. You must enter the dark corridor of the psyche where all that is borrowed cries for release. You must ask what is mine and what is not mine. Where do I end? And where does the other begin? This is not a question of intellect, but of confrontation. To know yourself is to draw the line that keeps the world from devouring you. Without this boundary, you dissolve into 1,000 fragments of borrowed suffering. There is a dream I recall, one shared by a patient long ago. She dreamt of a great cathedral filled with mirrors. As she walked through, each mirror reflected not her face, but the face of someone she knew, her mother weeping, her friend enraged, her lover betraying. She panicked, for she could not find herself among the faces. The mirrors only multiplied. endless corridors of borrowed identities. At last, she cried out, and one mirror shattered. Behind the broken glass was her own face, pale and trembling, but unmistakably hers. This dream is the drama of the empath, surrounded by reflections of others. You risk forgetting yourself, and only by breaking the mirrors, only by daring to fracture the illusion, can you reclaim your own image. This breaking is painful. It is the work of individuation, and individuation always requires destruction of illusion. The empath must learn that compassion without boundary is not love, but self-betrayal. To carry another's shadow is not to heal them, it is to prevent them from facing their own darkness. And so, in the name of empathy, you may actually rob them of their path. Do you see the paradox? The very act of absorbing their pain keeps them from the responsibility of transformation. You become the sacrificial lamb, but no resurrection follows, only repetition. The nightmare, then, is not only your suffering, but the perpetuation of theirs. And so, the curse deepens, you bleed for others. And in bleeding, you deny them the necessity of bleeding themselves. This is why empathy must be conscious. Otherwise, it is only a mask of love concealing an unconscious collusion with another's avoidance. As I speak these words, perhaps you feel resistance. Perhaps you ask, but what is wrong with feeling too much? What is wrong with carrying the burden of another? Is it not noble? Is it not divine? I will answer you. The divine does not ask you to destroy yourself in the name of love. True love requires separation as much as union. Christ carried the world's suffering. Yes, but only once, as an archetype to show the path. You are not asked to repeat this sacrifice endlessly. To do so is not love. It is unconscious identification with the archetype of the martyr. And the martyr archetype, when lived unconsciously, consumes the soul in bitterness. So, what then is the path? First, the acknowledgement. To name the curse is already to weaken its hold. To admit, I carry too much, I know too much, I feel too much, is to begin the work of release. Second, the descent. You must enter your own unconscious, face your own shadow, before you can discern what belongs to you and what does not. This is the task of analysis, the discipline of dreams, the courage to look at the images that rise in the night and ask, whose voice is this? Is it mine? Or is it the ghost of another living through me? Third, the boundary. Boundaries are not walls of the ego, but membranes of the soul. They are not rejection of the other, but protection of the self. Without them, there is no individuation, only dissolution. Let me pause here and tell you this. The curse of knowing too much can be transmuted. What feels like nightmare can become vision. The same sensitivity that haunts you can be the gateway to wisdom, but only if you claim it as yours rather than as a burden imposed by others. This transformation is not simple. It requires a death, the death of the savior complex, the death of the unconscious martyr, the death of the belief that your value lies in carrying others' wounds. Only through this death can empathy be reborn as clarity, as discernment, as power to heal without being destroyed. And so we descend further, as one must descend into the underworld of the soul to find what has been stolen. The empath's curse of knowing too much is not resolved at the surface, not by polite affirmations or shallow detachment. It must be met in the depths where archetypes dwell, where the ancient symbols of human experience reveal their terrifying clarity. It is here that you will discover why your sensitivity became a curse, why your gift turned into a nightmare. The first truth is this: your empathy is born not merely of compassion, but of wound. The wound is the gateway. Somewhere in your early life, perhaps even before memory, your boundaries were shattered. Perhaps a parent's grief flooded into you. Perhaps anger raged through the household. Perhaps silence was so suffocating that you felt compelled to listen to every subtle vibration, to anticipate every emotional tremor, to read the invisible atmosphere in order to survive. This is how the empath is born, not from bliss, but from survival. The child becomes a seismograph of feeling because safety depends on it. And what begins as adaptation becomes destiny. The unconscious engraves it into your being. To exist is to feel for others, to anticipate, to absorb. Thus, the gift is forged in fire, but the fire leaves scars. To know this is to see the archetype of the child at work, that eternal image of innocence burdened with awareness too heavy for its age. The child is meant to grow into the hero, to journey outward, to discover individuality. But when empathy becomes the defining trait, the child remains half-bound, arrested, forever scanning the world for danger, forever absorbing. The archetype of the orphan appears, the child abandoned to feelings too vast, too terrifying, too unspoken. This is the hidden origin of the empath's curse. The nightmare begins not in adulthood, but in the forgotten chambers of the early psyche, where the soul was torn open before it could defend itself. And so the empath lives with an unconscious belief: if I can feel enough, I will be safe. If I can absorb enough, I will be loved. If I can carry enough, I will be worthy. This belief becomes the silent tyrant. It drives you to take on what is not yours, to know what is not meant for you to know, to burden yourself with others' shadows. And though it may protect you for a time, eventually it becomes your prison. For no amount of caring will bring safety. No amount of knowing will bring love. No amount of empathy will heal the original wound. Instead, it deepens it. This is why the nightmare repeats. The empaths find themselves in relationships where they are drained, used, abandoned. They wonder why they are magnets for narcissists, for broken souls, for those who consume without giving. It is not random, it is archetypal. The wounded healer is destined to attract the wounded, but if unconscious, the healer becomes only the vessel of their poison. You live their archetype instead of yours. You carry their fate instead of meeting your own. And here the curse reaches its sharpest edge. You lose yourself. Losing oneself is not merely confusion. It is a psychic death. You no longer recognize where your thoughts end and another's begin. You cannot discern whether your sadness is your own or borrowed. The ego dissolves. not in the mystical sense of union with the divine, but in the pathological sense of possession by the other, dreams become nightmares. Waking life becomes fog. Your body aches with invisible burdens, and you begin to doubt your sanity. This is the dark side of empathy. The shadow, no one speaks of, but I will speak of it. For to name the shadow is to begin to disarm it. The empath's nightmare is not madness, it is the soul crying out for boundaries, for individuation, for recognition that you are not the world's scapegoat. You are not meant to carry every sorrow. You are not meant to bleed endlessly. You are not meant to dissolve into the sea of collective pain. The archetypes that live in you, the self, the hero, the lover, the sage, cannot be born if you are forever drowned in the unconscious of others. Yet there is temptation. Is there not a dark intoxication in knowing too much? You sense the unspoken, you pierce the mask, you feel what others cannot admit. There is a power in it, a sense of being chosen, of having eyes that see through illusions. But this power is double-edged, for if you cling to it unconsciously, it will consume you. You become addicted to knowing, to feeling, to bleeding. You mistake your suffering for identity. You say, I am the one who feels. I am the one who carries. I am the one who knows. And in this proclamation, the curse deepens. You bind yourself to the archetype of the martyr. You confuse annihilation with love, exhaustion with virtue, possession with wisdom. But wisdom is not exhaustion. Wisdom is not annihilation. Wisdom is not the endless absorption of pain. Wisdom is discernment, to know what belongs to you and what does not, to distinguish the archetype that is yours, to embody from the archetype that seeks to live through you parasitically. This is individuation. This is the path, and to walk it requires courage greater than any martyrdom, for it means letting go of the very identity you have built around suffering. Do you see how frightening this is? To stand and declare, I will no longer carry what is not mine. Feels like betrayal. It feels like abandonment. For so long, your worth has been tied to the burden. To set it down feels like death. And indeed, it is death, the death of the false self. The empath who lives only as a vessel for others, but on the other side of this death is rebirth. The empath is not destroyed. They are transfigured. Their sensitivity becomes vision. Their compassion becomes strength. Their knowing becomes wisdom. But this only comes after the descent, after the confrontation, after the death of the unconscious martyr. I recall another dream, one that haunted a man who had spent his life serving everyone but himself. He dreamt he was walking through a forest at night, carrying a sack filled with stones. The sack grew heavier with each step until he fell to his knees, crushed. Suddenly, a figure appeared, a dark figure, cloaked, faceless, and said, "Drop it." The man protested, "If I drop it, they will suffer." But the figure replied, "If you do not drop it, you will die, and then they will suffer still." The man hesitated, trembling, then let the sack fall. Instantly the stones turned to birds and flew into the sky. Each returning to its rightful place, he awoke weeping. For the dream revealed the truth. The burdens he carried were not his to hold. This is the work you must do, to release what is not yours, to let the stones return to their owners. This is not cruelty. It is justice. It is the restoration of order in the psyche. Each soul must bear its own shadow. To take it from them is to rob them of their individuation. But to return it is to set both them and yourself free. And yet, here comes the second nightmare. When you begin to set down what is not yours, when you begin to refuse the unconscious projections of others, they will resist, they will rage, they will accuse you of being selfish, unloving, cruel. For so long you have served as their vessel, their scapegoat, their psychic container. When you refuse, you threaten their unconscious arrangement. They would rather you bleed than they face their own darkness. This is why the empath so often feels punished for setting boundaries. The nightmare intensifies before it resolves. The archetype of the persecutor appears. You, once the savior, are cast as the villain. Do not be deceived. This too is part of the initiation. Every individuation demands betrayal, not of the true self, but of the false roles imposed by others. You must be willing to be misunderstood, even hated, in order to reclaim your soul. For the one who always pleases, always carries, always sacrifices, is not alive. They are enslaved. True life begins when you risk displeasing others to remain faithful to your own self. And this brings us to the deeper mystery, the self, that archetype of wholeness, that center beyond the ego which calls us toward completion. The self does not ask you to carry all. The self asks you to become whole, to unite shadow and light, to embody your own destiny. The empath, if awakened, can serve the self profoundly, for their sensitivity allows them to hear the whispers of the unconscious, to discern the symbols, to dream with clarity. But this service must be rooted in individuation, not martyrdom. The self does not want your annihilation. The self wants your transformation. Listen to me. The curse of knowing too much can be broken, but not by closing your eyes, not by pretending you do not feel, not by hardening yourself into stone. It is broken by discerning the difference between knowing and owning. You may know the shadow of another, but you need not own it. You may feel the pain of another, but you need not embody it. You may see through the illusion, but you need not become the victim of your sight. This is the alchemy of empathy, to hold the vision without carrying the burden, to witness without dissolving, to love without annihilating yourself. It is a razor's edge. Is it not a delicate balance between openness and boundary, between compassion and self-preservation? But this balance is the path of the awakened empath. To walk it is to leave the nightmare behind, to step into the mystery of true wisdom. For wisdom is not drowning, it is clarity. Wisdom is not possession, it is freedom. Wisdom is not annihilation, it is wholeness. The descent has been long, and perhaps you feel the weight of it, even now as I speak. But do not despair, for the underworld is not merely a place of torment, it is also the crucible of transformation. Every myth whispers this truth. One must go down to come up. One must die to be reborn. One must confront the shadow to encounter the self. And for the empath who knows too much, the nightmare in the dark is not the end, but the initiation. The soul is not destroyed by shadow, it is deepened. What destroys the soul is refusal, denial, the endless, running from what stalks you in dreams. But when you turn and face it, when you invite the darkness into dialogue, something astonishing happens. The nightmare begins to speak. What once haunted you as formless terror now reveals its archetypal face. The nameless sorrow becomes the mother in grief. The untraceable rage becomes the father betrayed. The unending anxiety becomes the child abandoned. In this recognition, power returns to you. For what is named can be related to, and what can be related to can be integrated. The empath then must learn to treat every nightmare as symbol, every foreign feeling as message. Do not ask, why is this happening to me? Ask instead, what does this represent in the archetypal drama of the soul? In this shift of perspective, you move from victim to participant, from the possessed to the dreamer who can read the dream, and the unconscious, once acknowledged, becomes teacher rather than tormentor. Let us consider the archetypal trials the empath must undergo in order to be transfigured. The first is a trial of separation. To separate is to distinguish what is yours from what is not. It is the most painful, for it feels like abandonment. You will feel guilt as you set down the borrowed burdens. You will hear the cries of those who depended on your unconscious sacrifice, but you must endure, for without separation there can be no individuation. Imagine a blacksmith removing impurities from metal. The fire burns, the hammer strikes, but in the end, the essence remains stronger, purer. So too, with the empath, the soul must be purified of what is not its own. The second trial is the confrontation with the shadow. Once you have set down what is not yours, you will discover that some of what you carried was projection of your own denied contents. This is the moment of terror, for it is easier to suffer for others than to face oneself. Easier to say, I feel their rage, than to admit, this rage is mine. But unless you face your own shadow, you will forever be haunted by it in others. Every projection you absorb will be a mirror of what you refuse to claim. Thus, the empath's greatest nightmare is not the pain of others, but the recognition of their own darkness. To walk through this trial, you must enter the mirror, as in the dream of the cathedral I told you before. You must allow the mirror to show not only the faces of others, but your own distorted, ugly, terrifying perhaps, yet undeniably yours. This is the path of courage. To see your envy, your anger, your desire for control, your hunger for love, so vast that it disguised itself as martyrdom. To see that part of you wished to be needed, to be indispensable, to be the savior. To see that empathy was not always pure, but sometimes laced with unconscious manipulation. This recognition is bitter, but it is also liberating, for only what is faced can be transformed. The third trial is the surrender to the self. The ego, accustomed to control, resists. It wants to define, to master, to dictate. But individuation is not achieved by egoic control. It is achieved by surrender to the greater pattern, the self that orchestrates the dance of the psyche. The empaths must learn to trust that they are guided, that the archetypes are not enemies but initiators, that the unconscious does not seek their destruction but their wholeness. This surrender is not passive. It is an active choice to align with the deeper current rather than resist it. It is like a swimmer who stops thrashing and allows the river to carry them, discovering that the river does not drown but delivers. Through these trials, the empath begins to awaken. The nightmare loosens its grip. The curse of knowing too much becomes the vision of knowing truly. For now, knowledge is no longer a burden, but a symbol. To sense another's sorrow is not to carry it, but to witness it, to name it, to mirror it back so they may see what was hidden. To feel another's shadow is not to embody it, but to acknowledge it, to respect it as part of their journey. To dream of archetypal images is not to be haunted, but to be instructed, to learn the language of the soul. Do you see the transformation? The empath does not lose their gift, they refine it. The sensitivity remains, but it is tempered by discernment. The knowing remains, but it is grounded in boundary. The compassion remains, but it is freed from the compulsion to bleed. What was once curse becomes calling. What was once nightmare becomes initiation. What was once too much becomes precisely enough. Let me tell you a vision that comes often in the analysis of those who walk this path. It is the vision of the light in the cave. The dreamer finds themselves wandering in darkness, surrounded by shadows, overwhelmed by fear. Suddenly, in the distance, a faint light appears. It is small, flickering, almost imperceptible, but it draws them forward. As they approach, they see that it is a candle held in their own hand. They had been carrying it all along, though they never noticed. This is the truth of the empath. The light is within you, not in the borrowed burdens, not in the endless carrying, not in the martyrdom. The light is your own self, your own wholeness, your own being. Once you see this, the nightmare loses its terror, for you realize you are not helpless in the dark. Yet the work is not done, for transformation is not a single event, but a continual process. The unconscious is inexhaustible. Archetypes return in new forms, shadows emerge in new disguises, trials repeat with new intensity. The empath must remain vigilant, must continue to discern, to separate, to confront, to surrender. But now they do so not as victim, but as initiate. They walk the path with awareness, and awareness is liberation. Let us return then to the question of knowing too much. What is the meaning of this knowledge? Why does the empath see what others cannot, feel what others will not? It is not to carry, but to reveal. You are the mirror, the dreamer, the seer. You are meant to name what is hidden, to bring to consciousness what is buried, to hold the tension of opposites until truth emerges. This is sacred work. It is the work of the analyst, the healer, the mystic, the artist, but it can only be fulfilled when the curse is broken, when empathy is conscious, when the self, not the shadow, guides you. So I say to you, do not fear the nightmare. It is the mask of the archetype. Do not curse your knowing. It is the seed of vision. Do not despise your sensitivity. It is the doorway to wisdom, but do not confuse any of these for martyrdom. Do not believe that to love is to annihilate yourself. Do not believe that to help is to carry what is not yours. These are lies whispered by the shadow. The truth is deeper. To love is to see, to help is to reveal, to heal is to mirror. Your soul's task is not to drown in the unconscious, but to bring light into it. The curse is broken when you recognize this. The nightmare ends when you awaken within it, and then the darkness no longer terrifies, for you see that it is not emptiness, but depth. The empath who knows too much becomes the one who knows truly, who knows the self, who knows the wholeness hidden in every shadow. This is your destiny, if you dare to walk it. And now, as we near the end of this journey, I ask you to breathe deeply and feel where you are. You have walked through shadow. You have endured the weight of borrowed burdens. You have entered the nightmare and listened to its voice. And slowly, perhaps imperceptibly, the curse has begun to shift. What was once terror now becomes initiation. What was once darkness now becomes depth. You are not the same as when you began. The empath who staggered beneath the weight of too much knowing has begun to stand taller, to see clearer, to feel with discernment rather than compulsion. But integration is not an abstract idea. It is lived, it is embodied. It requires that you take what you have seen in the depths and bring it into the rhythms of your daily existence. The empath who once dissolved into others must now practice the art of remaining whole while in relationship. This is no simple task, for the world will test you again and again. Projections will be cast upon you again and again. The unconscious of others will seek to pour into your vessel. Again and again, the temptation will arise to carry, to absorb, to bleed. But now you carry within you the memory of the descent, the wisdom of the nightmare, the vision of the self, and with that memory, you can choose differently. To live integrated empathy means to witness without drowning. When you sense another's sorrow, you do not claim it as your own, but you do not dismiss it either. You name it, you mirror it, you hold the space for it to be seen. This act is profoundly healing, for most people do not need their burdens carried. They need them acknowledged. They need to see that their shadow does not destroy love, that their grief does not erase connection, that their anger does not banish them from belonging. When you reflect back their truth without absorbing it, you offer them the chance to individuate, and in doing so, you fulfill your archetypal role as the seer, the witness, the mirror. To live integrated empathy also means to honor your own needs, to claim your own desires, to ground yourself in the soil of your own body. Too often, the empath lives disembodied, floating in the atmosphere of others' emotions, untethered to their own. But the body is the anchor of the soul. The body reminds you, I am here, I am separate, I am alive, to breathe, to move, to touch, to rest. These are not trivial acts. They are sacred affirmations of selfhood. When you honor your body, you honor your boundary. You say to the world, I exist, I am whole. I am not your vessel, but my own being. And integration means remembering that darkness itself is not your enemy. Too often, the empath fears the dark, equates it with danger, with possession, with nightmare. But the dark is also womb, also soil, also mystery. The shadow, when faced, is not only destructive, it is creative. It holds the energy you need to become whole. Rage becomes strength, grief becomes compassion, fear becomes intuition. The dark contains the seeds of transformation, and when you cease to flee from it, you discover that it was never against you, it was always guiding you deeper. Now, let us speak of rebirth. For every descent demands an ascent, every crucifixion whispers of resurrection. The empath reborn is not emptied of sensitivity, but crowned with discernment. They do not walk as martyr, but as mystic. They no longer say, I am cursed by knowing too much. Instead, they declare, I am blessed by knowing, truly. Their vision is no longer clouded by borrowed pain, but sharpened by clarity. Their compassion is no longer compulsive, but free. Their relationships are no longer prisons of projection, but dances of authenticity. This rebirth does not mean the end of struggle. Individuation is never finished. The unconscious continues to unfold. The archetypes continue to test. The shadow continues to whisper, but you are no longer afraid. For you know now that the nightmare can be entered, that the dark can be faced, that the self waits in the depths to guide you. You know that the empath's path is not to carry the world, but to reveal it, not to bleed endlessly, but to embody wholeness, not to dissolve, but to integrate. And what does this mean for the collective, for the world around you? It means that the awakened empath becomes a force of transformation. For when you stop absorbing others' shadows unconsciously, you force them to face themselves. You become the mirror they cannot ignore. You speak truths that cannot be silenced. You embody boundaries that liberate rather than confine. Your very presence becomes initiatory, not because you carry their pain, but because you refuse to. And in refusing, you invite them into their own wholeness. This is the mystery of individuation. When you claim yourself, you liberate others. When you stop dissolving, you show them it is possible to stand. When you stop caring, you invite them to shoulder their own fate. And in this way, your empathy becomes not curse, not martyrdom, not nightmare, but blessing, initiation, archetypal calling. You become not the haunted vessel, but the luminous witness. I want you to feel this now, as if I were placing my hand upon your shoulder in this very moment. You are not here to be devoured. You are not here to drown. You are not here to vanish beneath the weight of others. You are here to become whole, to face your own shadow, to carry your own destiny, to walk your own path. And from that wholeness, you can meet the world with clarity You can love without annihilating yourself. You can know without being cursed. You can feel without being consumed. Do not underestimate the power of this shift, for the world desperately needs those who can witness without drowning, who can love without losing themselves, who can know without collapsing under the weight of knowledge. The empath awakened is not fragile, but formidable. They are the mystic who sees, the healer who mirrors, the dreamer who interprets, the artist who gives form to the formless. They are the bridge between unconscious and conscious, between shadow and light, between wound and transformation. So let the nightmare be the teacher, not the enemy. Let the curse be the initiation, not the end. Let the darkness be the soil from which your self emerges, radiant and whole. And when the burden presses again, as it surely will, remember, you are not its vessel. You are the witness. You are the mirror. You are the one who knows truly. Not too much. Perhaps one last image will remain with you. Imagine yourself standing in a vast hall of darkness, filled with voices, shadows, sorrows, not your own. For years you wandered there, confused, burdened, believing this was your fate. But now, in your hand, you hold the candle, the light flickers, but it is steady. You lift it high, and in its glow you see that the shadows are not infinite. They are only projections on the wall. They dissolve when faced. You walk forward, and the hall becomes a temple, and the darkness becomes depth, and the nightmare becomes vision. This is the end of the curse. This is the beginning of your wholeness. And so I leave you with this. Do not curse your sensitivity, but claim it. Do not fear your knowing, but refine it. Do not despise your shadow, but integrate it. For in doing so, you fulfill the archetypal pattern of the empath, not the haunted victim, but the awakened mystic. And in that awakening, you not only free yourself, but you offer the world the rarest of gifts, the presence of one who sees truly, feels deeply, and yet remains whole.